Hello, it's David Snowski here with Rubble Road Soapstone Kits, and today we are going to work on the small bear. I'm going to show you how we're going to shape this and polish this with 3 pieces of sandpaper. So if you want to get in a little bit closer, I'll show you exactly how I shape and sand my bear. Alright, so here we have the small bear. You can see how it's all one predetermined thickness all the way throughout. So we're going to use the sandpaper here. We're going to use a 60 mesh to do some shaping. Pretty fantastic looking bear even in its raw state. I know this is going to be really beautiful when we're finished. Stone is so soft we can scratch that just with our fingernail, right? That's how soft this rock is. But luckily we're going to do some shaping with some 60 mesh sandpaper. We're going to use this to do our primary shaping on this piece of stone. All the sandpapers are also made for use in the water, so we're going to pop that in there as well. Now, with the bear, I find it's 3 kind of lines that I really focus on for my bear. One being the waist or the hip for the back. One, the neckline, and then also narrowing the nose, because most animals, their nose isn't as wide as their face. With these small 2Ds, we typically concentrate our efforts onto one side. So after you've soaked your stone, you can decide which side of your stone you want to work on. I'm going to work on this one. With the 60 mesh grit here, I'm going to fold this in half. I need a nice coarse edge for me to do my shaping, so that's what I'm going to get when I fold this in half. Now with the bear, you're going to notice in front of the front leg, there's a bit of a hump on the back here. I like to kind of make that the shoulder for the bear. So if I'm going to narrow the stone in behind, I want to make sure I've got a nice line for the back of the front leg, but then also for the neckline. Right here, to really help make that shoulder, that front limb stick out a little bit more, adds a little bit of dimension. You have to remember that with stone carving, you're not adding any rock, you're only taking stone away. So any parts that we want to stick out more, the front, the back legs, we really need to kind of work the material in between them down a little bit to make them stand out. Same with the cheeks on this bear. I'm going to carve that snout down a little bit here as well. What that's going to do is really going to help the face stand out a little bit more, the cheeks of the bear. And then I'm also going to round out this hip a little bit. So when I'm trying to round off a hip, I go back and forth, smaller movements, and I'm just kind of turning my rock as I do that. And I'm trying to curve it and match the curve up with the inside of that back foot. So you can kind of see I'm aiming at that back foot right now. As we're creating dust, we're going to rinse that off. Make sure you rinse the dust off of your sandpaper as well. I'd like to keep that bear bottom pretty big. So the larger we keep it, the less material we need to remove from in between the back and the front leg. So we can kind of see how I've got a nice little curve here. I'll rinse that off. Might be, there we go. Nice little curve right there. That's kind of what we're looking for. Create that back hip. And now to make sure that these stand out more, we need to carve this down even more. We need to make sure that those grooves that we're making are deeper in this stone, because once we go to sandpaper number 2, if those grooves aren't deep enough, we will be erasing them with our second sandpaper. The first sandpaper is used to do your primary shaping on these rocks, and then you also want to kind of give yourself a consistent finish on your entire stone as well. We're going to round off the square blocky corners here, but also when we're shaping, we want to make sure we get rid of the striping pattern that's caused from the bandsaw when we actually cut these shapes out. So you can kind of see that gray striping pattern. We want to make sure we get rid of that with the first sandpaper as well. Small scratches are fine because we'll be able to get rid of those small scratches once we actually go to sandpaper number 2 and start smoothing out this rock. Speaking of the rock, the stone is from Brazil. We're using Brazilian soapstone here today. It's one of our favorites. Worldwide, it's known for its softness, but also for its great range of color. And I'm going to have a pretty nice range of color in this bear right here. I got a little bit of brown, some shades of green, some grays, some blacks. It's got a lot going on. I think it's going to look really, really good once it's done. So using those folded ridges, I'm just kind of accentuating those lines that I really, really want. Really digging in there. And then for this middle section here, you know what? I'll fold up my sandpaper a couple of times to really get in there. So now it gives me a much thicker ridge to work with. The sandpaper itself now is going to become a little bit stiffer as well, so that when I actually push in there, it's really going to help dig into that rock and really get rid of some of that stone. Constant pressure, constant contact, scrubbing that rock away. Push, 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 push. You're going to get some different looks in this stone because of the different minerals that are in here. This is a metamorphic rock, so it's gone through some changes with heat and pressure. So not every single soapstone carving you're ever going to make is going to be exactly the same. You're going to get some variations in the hardness on that, depending on what kinds of heats and pressures it was subjected to during its formation. And then also the kind of minerals that are in it as well, which is predominantly iron. There's mostly iron inclusions in here, but we'll get some actinolite in here as well. Maybe get some little feldspars, stuff like that. Sometimes it glitters a little bit, so it really is a beautiful rock to work with. Really easy to shape. As far as stone carving goes, it doesn't get any easier in soapstone. But like all stone carvings, it's a process. The nice thing about the soapstone is because it's such a soft rock, we only need 3 steps for this process, for the shaping and the sanding. And then the oil is the final. So as I'm doing my shaping, I'm really going around making sure I'm getting rid of those gray tooling marks that are on this rock as well. We want to make sure that the natural colors of this stone are coming through. The old thumb technique is one of my favorites. Pushing with my thumb on areas where I know I got to get rid of material or stone. You can get a lot of strength and pressure underneath your thumb in a concentrated area. So this is great for rounding off edges. I'm going to narrow that nose a little bit more still. And then for that, I'm just trying to make sure you can see, like, there's the ear, right? Ear ramps up, comes down, then there's an eyebrow ridge, and then the nose ridge. I just want to make sure I'm working only on that nose ridge and not cutting into the eyebrow ridge or the ear ridge. I just want to try and narrow this little section of the carving itself. Although if you do happen to go offline and make a mistake, don't worry about it. As long as you don't keep making the same mistake over and over again, any small mistakes you'll make will easily be erased with the second sandpaper. underneath the chin here, just making sure I'm getting rid of all those tooling marks. Very important that you do it in stage 1, because as the grits are getting smoother, getting rid of material is going to become harder as that sandpaper gets even smoother and smoother. And the last step is a 600 grit. So that 600 grit pretty much just smooths that existing surface that you have. It doesn't even really do any shaping. Rounding off some of these edges here. So with soapstone, you'll find that typically brown soapstone is softer, green is kind of intermediate, and then the darker it is, the blacker it is, usually the denser it is. So the one I'm working on here has got quite a bit of black hiding in it. So it's actually pretty solid piece of soapstone. I'm definitely having to use some hand strength for this one here today. But that's kind of the draw. I find that the harder a stone is, the more details you can carve into it. You are somewhat limited to the details in this rock because it is a soft stone, regardless of which color it is. I'm also going to get rid of the gray stripes on the other side here. So you can really see, if I only got part of them, you can really see how that gray still kind of pops out. And that's going to inhibit the actual natural color from coming through. So you really want to make sure you're getting rid of that. Really bring those natural colors out. Dig in there and really narrow that waist a bit. The more I actually make that waist groove, the more I kind of dig in there, the more it's going to help those front and rear limbs really stick out and pop, right? Round off those toes. You can use a thumb technique for that one too if you want. Back toes are a little tougher to get to. That's where I fold my sandpaper up really small so I can kind of work in a more concentrated area. And just do my best to round those toes off. Just rounding off square edges right now. We could split those ears if we wanted to as well, just to kind of make one ear kind of pop. Because we're essentially making half of a bear right now. I wouldn't want to individually split all 4 limbs on this. to give myself 4 legs, because each leg would be so narrow and so thin it would be prone to just breaking, which does happen if you're a stone carver. You will break some stuff if you're going to carve any rock for any length of time. With soapstone, if you do happen to break something, just stop. Because I work in water all the time, I just let it dry. I'll use a super glue or even an epoxy, glue those pieces together. Once that glue dries, then you can go right back to sanding or carving, whichever part of the process you're in at that time. But I do like to stop immediately and then repair it before I continue working on my sculpture. I find the neckline is really important. It really adds some dimension. It really gives you a separation between the head of the animal and then the front shoulder. So I really kind of work on that, trying to round off that cheek a little bit as I do this. I don't know what you're looking for, buddy. I'm also going to try and kind of round off the hump on the front shoulder of this bear as well. I'm just really trying to round off a bunch of those square blocky edges. You know, just working them down bit by bit. If you wanted to put a tail on this guy, you could make a V shape on the back end of the bear and then just leave that triangle alone and carve into the back leg, and that'll help raise that tail out a little bit. For this particular bear though today, I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to put a tail on this guy. And open up my sandpaper, refold it in a new spot. Maybe round that cheek off a little bit. Kind of blocky, right? I really like to soften a lot of edges. Not too bad. Pretty close. Just gonna carve down on that neckline a little bit just to really help make that neck kind of pop a little bit. Really create some separation in the head and then that top hump on the back. Rounding out that front shoulder a little bit more. It's not bad. You know, it seems pretty basic and pretty plain, but for the bear, narrowing the nose, creating a neckline and a waistline. 3 simple lines that are really effective to adding some detail to this particular stone. You can see I didn't go super deep on all of them, just almost like waves going over the rock. So once I'm pretty happy with that, I can go to sandpaper number 2. So I took sandpaper number 1 out. Sandpaper number 2 is a 320 grit. And what we're going to do with this one is we're going to get rid of all the little scratches that we've just left behind with sandpaper number 1. Sandpaper number 2 is also going to be going into the water. Now for sandpaper 2 and 3, you want to make sure that you're not scrubbing your soapstone on the bottom of your bucket because of sandpaper number 1. You can see just how much grit I got rid of on this paper just shaping that stone. It was a darker stone, a little bit harder, a little bit denser, so it really took a lot out of this sandpaper, but it was still effective enough to get the job done. But all the grit that was on here, all that silicon carbide is now in the bottom of my bin. And if I'm scrubbing my soft soapstone across there, it will be putting tiny scratches back into my carving. So for sandpaper 2 and 3, just do your best to dip it or just kind of lightly rinse it off. If you have easy access to water, you can always just swap your water out as well to help kind of bypass that problem as well. So sandpaper number 2, good once over. Let's get rid of all those little scratches that we just left behind with sandpaper number 1. And we're going to really start to change this surface again. So it was quite gray when we started. Now the colors are coming through. Now we're really going to start to see those colors popping. But the texture is also going to be much, much smoother now as well. So you can really see how it's really shining. We're seeing all the little details in here, which is my favorite. I often relate stone carving to having a picture that's out of focus. Once we start to do our sanding, we bring in those colors and all the little patterns that are in the stone into a clear picture for us to see. So if you happen to go to sandpaper number 2 and you're starting to smooth it out and you see, oh, there's still some little gray scratches that I should have gotten with stage 1, You can always go back to stage 1, get rid of those little gray stripes or deeper scratches so that you have a nice consistent surface so that you can easily remove any scratches that you do not want with sandpaper number 2. You need to do that because with sandpaper 3 being so smooth and so soft, it's not really going to get rid of any scratches for you. All that's going to do is just smooth that existing surface that you already have. So all the real work is done between sandpapers 1 and 2. Rinsing off without touching the bottom. Still use that thumb technique on sandpaper 2 if you want. Pushing with your thumb. Fold it up too. Make it smaller, make it easier to hang on to. I do lots of rinsing when I'm sanding in my second sandpaper because I like to keep the surface nice and clean, so it helps me see any spots that I've missed. But as there's also a lot of iron in here, sometimes you can dislodge little minute pieces of iron, and as you just keep on scrubbing, you might accidentally rub them across the surface, creating more scratches. But if you're constantly rinsing, that's less likely to happen. And as this stone, the sandpaper sits in the water, it actually makes that paper more pliable. So it actually forms to your stone a little bit easier after it's gotten nice and wet. I'm just doing my best to be as consistent as I can right now. Everywhere, all over this carving. And I want to make sure that I'm working on the sides. I don't want to just run over top of the ears. If I continue just rubbing across the ears, I'll actually grind them right down, and then my bear won't have any more ears. So you want to make sure you're not getting rid of any of the details in your stone. You're just sanding them, right? You don't want to over sand either. Just get rid of those scratches, start to smooth it out. That's it. Once it's kind of got that nice smooth texture to it and you don't see any scratches, you can leave that area alone and then concentrate on a different spot. For around the head and snout area, I typically fold my sandpaper up nice and thin. So that I can really work on those individual ridges to the best of my ability. Lots of rinsing. That way you know where you've been working already and where you need to go. In the belly, like in this bottom area, this is gonna be your toughest spot. So with it all folded up nice and small, you can kind of wedge that sandpaper in there so that it fills that gap as much as possible, so you can just try and do the best job possible, right? looking for any scratches that I don't want. Now's the time to get rid of them. Because once I go to sandpaper number 3, it's just going to be a quick, easy once over with that 600 grit just to kind of smooth everything out one more time. It's almost twice as smooth as sandpaper number 2, but it doesn't really get rid of any scratches. So that's why you really want to make sure that you've prepared everything before you go to sandpaper number 3. Thumb technique is a great way to get rid of stubborn scratches that you don't want. And sandpaper 2 can really be textural. You can use your hands more just to kind of feel, to see how that stone feels as well. Not too bad. The insides of those back feet are probably the toughest spot to get to on the bear. And that's where folding up your sandpaper multiple times will really help. Gives you a little bit thicker ridge to work with, so it holds its shape a little better, and it'll actually kind of get into those little nooks and crannies a little better when it's all folded up. That's pretty good. That's all right for me. I'm pretty happy with that. Try to be patient and thorough, right? Take your time. Stone carving isn't a race, it's a process. Really taking my time, looking over my stone, making sure. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. Got a nice waistline here, I've got a nice neckline, the nose is narrower. Got 3 distinct areas that I've carved into this stone. Color's really starting to pop out really well right now. Nice light green hiding through there, mostly a pretty dark stone. It was pretty hard in comparison to other soapstone I've worked before, but that's all right. Just means it's gonna take a really nice polish, that's all. So once I'm finished with sandpaper number 2, Sandpaper number 3, 600 grit. This is your last sandpaper. So again, it goes in the water, making sure I don't scrub my soapstone on the bottom of my bucket. And it's just a quick once over. If you have a really nice consistent finish with sandpaper number 1, sandpaper 2 is going to be much easier and in effect quicker as well. And then, you know, if you get a really good consistent finish with sandpaper 2, sandpaper 3 is really quick. It's just a quick once over with this, just to kind of smooth out that surface. Should feel like glass when you're done. Feels really, really nice. Just remember, it's not really there to get rid of any scratches. It's just there for the surface itself. Making sure I don't scrub it on the bottom of my bucket. I don't want to scratch it now. And again, with the 600, you can fold that up in half if you want to as well to make it a little bit more manageable, especially when you're working in some of those little smaller nooks and crannies. I like to fold it right up. But when I'm doing larger surface areas, I just kind of leave the sandpaper open and then just use as much of my hand as I can to push that sandpaper around and make sure I'm getting as many surface contacts as I can, right? Now I'm going to work in the smaller areas and around the nose here. I'm going to fold my sandpaper up because I need to work on these smaller concentrated areas. And a smaller, thicker piece of sandpaper will actually do me a little better. It'll work better for me. Being said, do I always make sure all my carvings are super smooth? No, not always. Sometimes I do leave some texture on there. That's the great thing about being an artist, is you get to kind of use your own creativity and do your own thing and make this what you want, right? Add your own details, whether you're carving different grooves in there. If you like it to kind of be lifestyle, more realistic, you can always Google image whatever you're carving to get thousands of images of that. So that'll really help you be more realistic and be really effective at nailing certain aspects of your carving as well. Or if you're just going more stylized and just putting some cool grooves or lines or patterns in there, that's always fun too. Just make sure that your initial grooves and patterns are deep enough so that you don't accidentally erase them once you go to sandpaper 2. Feeling pretty nice. So once I have completely finished my carving and I've sanded it and I'm happy with my finished product, what I do is I rinse this off in clean water to get this dusty water off of it. I let that dry, usually overnight, just to make sure that it's nice and completely dry before that final oiling step happens. You really want to make sure they're dry before you're oiling these. And you want to make sure that the surface is nice and clean as well. Take a look. Feels pretty amazing, I'll tell you that. All the minerals in here, this stone looks pretty amazing too. Pretty happy with that. I like that. It's bold, it's dark. Some beautiful color in this piece, right? So now I'm going to go rinse this off in clean water, get this dusty water off of here so I can start the drying process so that I can finish oiling my carving. All right, so now it's completely dry, we're going to oil this. I like to oil the flat side first, or the bottom of my carving here. So just using the Q-tip, spreading that oil as evenly as possible. I like to let that oil sit for, at least 2 hours before I wipe off the excess. And usually there's enough for 2 coats in the smalls at least. So one side's completely oiled on this side. Got that beautiful color coming through. I'm going to flip it over and now finish up on the other side. Always make sure to tuck it into those little toe areas, spots where it's hard to get to first. Bold colors coming through. I really like it. Got a paper towel down to help protect the surface that I'm oiling on. It also allows me to just kind of move my carving around so I can make sure I'm getting every spot as effectively as possible. You could always use a multitude of different things to finish this, whether it's the oils, Danish oil, tung oil, which is what we provide in our kits. You can always use a gloss varathane spray paint on there as well, or a more traditional finish would be a melted beeswax. It would all work on this quite well. All right, so now that it's coated everywhere, I'm going to let this sit for 2 hours, wipe off the excess. All right, and there we have it, your very own finished soapstone grizzly bear. I hope you enjoyed carving it as much as I do. I hope the tips and tricks helped you in carving your own special bear. If you would like to see more from us, please like and follow, and you can stay on board with all the advice that we have for our carvings as well. And I'd like to thank you very much for joining me here today. I'm David Swinowski with Rubble Road Soapstone Kits.